Good afternoon, friends, and welcome to your lecture on the Gospel of St. John for our Bible as Literature class. I'm so glad that you can be here and be a part of these last couple lectures as we come to the end of the semester. And so I turn your attention to the Gospel of St. John as the fourth in the Bible and the New Testament. The Gospel of St. John is referred to as not being one of the synoptic Gospels. We talked about the synoptic Gospels being the Gospel of Matthew, of Mark, and of Luke. And so the difference would then be, well, why do we say that John is not one of the synoptic Gospels? And the reason is that the stories that are in the other three Gospels are absent in this one. And it's just structured in a very unique way. It's structured in a very different way. It's structured in a way that causes us to pause and reflect as we kind of read the gospel. And I really want you to do that, read the Gospel of St. John. I want you to be thinking in terms of how it's so much different from the other Gospels. And so if you were to look at your Ehrman text, I mean, he really kind of draws this out by saying these words. He says, the stories make up the backbone of the synoptic accounts of Jesus. What most casual readers of the New Testament have never realized is that none of them is in John, right? And so here's what he talks about. He says, "We read the gospel for yourself and see. There is no reference to the virginal conception or birth in Bethlehem, no narration of his baptism. He does not go into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. He never casts out a demon. He does not preach about the coming kingdom, and he never tells a parable. He does not experience the transfiguration. He does not institute the Lord's Supper. He does not pray at Gethsemane to escape the passion, and he is not tried by the Sanhedrin and found guilty for blasphemy." And so those are major touchstones, major turns in the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke that are absent in the Gospel of St. John. Instead, the Gospel of St. John really is an illustration of the Torah. And if you remember, the Torah are the first 5 books of the Bible, the first 5 books of the Hebrew Scripture, which is often referred to as the Old Testament. And so in describing the Gospel of St. John, we have to look at it from the very beginning. And so if you were to look at, go right to the very beginning, it's the Gospel of St. John, chapter 1, verse 1. We read these words. It says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." And so we have this in the beginning moment, which we know all the way back from Genesis. And so this is, if you would, a retelling, a renewal of that original story. It is the gospel writer's intent to clearly hold strong and obvious parallels between the Torah and this experience with God. This is clearly, in a sense, the Gospel of St. John is illustrating that Jesus is this Christ, that Jesus is one and the same with God, and that Jesus has this ultimate connection, including and not limited to a place where Jesus will say in the gospel that he and the Father are one. And for us in the 21st century, we may not see that as ultra important by any stretch of the imagination, being one with somebody. However, in the first century, in the Hebrew culture, in the Jewish culture, and the lineage that brings the people from that not only religious but spiritual, cultural, connected to the temple. To say that I'm one with somebody is to say literally I am them. They and I are the same person. Today we might put people together who are married or in some other kind of relationship that demonstrates the sense that they're inseparable. And this is bigger than inseparable. This is not just inseparable. This is as if they are molded together into one entity. So that's a super powerful statement for anyone to make, for a rabbi to make, and definitely for someone to say as they are preaching and teaching in first century Palestine. So we'll go on. So he was in the beginning with God. All things came into being through him, and without him, not one thing came into being. So to say that in the New Testament, we will read that, and I think it was in Luke, where Jesus says that the whole thing, all the stuff that you've read, right, all comes back through Jesus. It all, the whole previous prophets, all the histories, everything like that, all comes back. It's in the walk to Emmaus, where the two men are, the two disciples are walking, and Jesus comes upon them, and he opens up their minds. He sets their hearts on fire, and he tells them that all has existed before that is pointing to him as this culmination, and that is where Jesus uses the term, "I am the Alpha and I am the Omega. I am the beginning and I am the end." These are all focused on this sense that this very beginning, the Gospel of St. John says that at the beginning, at the Big Bang, if you will, at the very first words of Genesis, Jesus is there and God is there. This Father and Son entity is unbreakable, and you can't separate them. If you can imagine two Legos that have been kind of put together, then glued, and they are one. They are bound in all ways and all possibilities. So we have this Genesis experience, right? Certainly to turn our minds, turn our attentions right away to this new experience with Jesus. Then we hear that the I am ... And we know that Jesus uses the I am statements sprinkled throughout the other Gospels. However, in the Gospel of St. John, we read that the I am statements coming from Jesus 46 times. 46 times we hear I am. And that we know goes back to the Exodus experience, right? We know that when Moses stands before the burning bush and he asks, "Who is it, that I will tell everybody is sending me?" And he hears, "I am, the great I am sends you." And so the Gospel of St. John no longer makes the I am a mystery, no longer makes it an unknown. I am who I am is no longer something that is not tactile, experiential, or being able to follow. The Gospel of St. John is saying to the readers in this moment that you no longer have to guess about this mystery. It is no longer something that, we're unsure of, this distant experience. He was trying to say that in a sense, that Jesus is the incarnation, the absolute existence, and so it comes out in all these ways. There are these healings. He brings back. I can't think of his name. Sorry. He brings people back from the dead. I'm sorry. We'll talk about it a little bit later on. He has these miracles. He turns the water into wine. Just in the same way, out of there was nothing, God creates this something, right? And so these are the pieces. These are the components by which the I am stories exist. It's no longer something that that someone says and can't point to. That you just have to believe it. It is actually there, and seeing it and being a part of what goes on in there. So it is all the I am statements. So it covers this. It really puts us together with the Exodus statement. The next is Leviticus. And I think it's important to say, well, let me just stop right here. And that is the key when I talk about the I am. And we see that in the Gospel of John, chapter 14, verse 6, where he says, "I am the way and the truth and the life." We talked about that as the Torah being those three things in the Tanakh. And so Jesus is saying, I'm the Tanakh. I am the living, actual experience by which you will understand and know the Tanakh. You will know the entire Torah. You will know everything that there is to know about God by simply being there and being with me. Including also, we have this moment where he walks on the water, right? In 6, in chapter 6, and what's interesting and different from what he does is that there's no space by which Peter is invited to come out and walk on the water with him. So these are the things that we start to find out about Jesus, that he is the I am. The next item I wanted to bring to your attention is about Leviticus. And so we know that Leviticus lays out all the laws, all the regulations way. And we read about the rules and how we're supposed to behave between each other and one another, and how we're supposed to behave before God, and what is clean and what is unclean. And so we see in the Gospel of St. John in chapter 8, there's a description about what the law says and what I say, right? And so, or what Jesus says in this lesson, and said, he's talking about they're at this festival, and the scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in adultery, and we know, right, adultery is in the Ten Commandments, right? Who was caught in adultery, and making her stand before all of them, they said to him, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the very act of committing adultery. Now in the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. Now what do you say?" They said this to test him, so that they might have some charge to bring against him. And so Jesus bends down and wrote with his finger on the ground. When they kept on questioning him, he straightened up and said to them, "Let anyone among you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." And so these religious leaders are truly connected to what's supposed to be going on in these laws. I mean, this is Leviticus, right? It's the center of the Torah. It's the middle book. It's the one that holds all the laws and the regulations and the rules that we hold dear to establish our relationship with God. And here he's saying, oh, well, you're supposed to stone this person. Well, here's this piece to this. So he's really questioning and challenging not simply the laws so much as the interpretation of the laws. It takes two to tango. Where's the man that needs to be stoned along with this woman? And also, are the laws based on regulations that are not with any kind of spirit? Right? If we believe, in this text, and this is the text that they're trying to, if there's some kind of spirit, if God has given us the laws, he must have given them the laws for a reason, for a purpose. Like there's a spirit to the law, right? There's a reason why this is happening. And so Jesus is saying, well, the spirit of the law is saying this. And so the question is, well, if you've got no sins, then go ahead, stone her, knock yourselves out. And there is this incredible pause, right? And so they don't stone her, and not only do they not stone her, the eldest, the older of those who came before her, they start to drop their stones first and go on, and then eventually they all walk away. And then Jesus says to this woman, right? She says, where are those who have condemned you? Has no one condemned you? And she said, no one, sir. And Jesus said, neither do I condemn you. Go your way, and from now on, and do not sin. And so what he's trying to, what John is trying to communicate here is that the purpose of the law is not to punish. The purpose of the law is not to catch people and stuff. So the purpose of the law is to adjust your behavior to be in good relationship to one another. So if you're in good relationship to one another, that's the ultimate goal. There's no reason to do these next pieces. There's no reason for someone to be stoned. I mean, there isn't any reason for someone to be stoned to begin with. But he's trying to make this point that it's not about the process; it's about the end. It's about what's the meaning by which we do these things. And so often we forget about. We have laws, we have expectations, and you break this law, you get this. You do this, you get that, without really taking a step back, right? And this is what good literature does to us: makes us step back and question, why do we really have those laws? What's the end game? What's the end result? So that's the piece that kind of runs that parallel with Leviticus, right? The next, right, is we talk about numbers, right? And we know that two things about numbers, it's also numbers, and it's also arithmoi, which means wilderness. And so throughout the gospel, we have these stories where Jesus takes them through this journey, and the journeys in each piece, they go from Sabbath to festival of weeks to festival of booths to Passover, right? And so there's this sense that they're on this journey in the same way that the Hebrew people are on their journey through the wilderness to the promised land. And so throughout this story, throughout the Gospel of St. John, we learn that the goal here is to take them through these seasons, right? And so the same that holds true that we learn about and numbers about the census, the counting, the importance of every one person, and the fact that they go through these seasons of their life, they go through this wilderness of their life to reach the promised land. So that is really the next piece that is a Torah-esque, if you will, in the Gospel of St. John. Last we do is Deuteronomy, right? And so Deuteronomy, we know, is the last book of the Tanakh, right? We know is the last book. I'm not sure the last book of the Torah, right? And so what we're trying to do is make these new life. It's a second life, a second law. That's what Deuteronomy is about. These priests, right? And so second law means second chances, right? So Lazarus, I'm sorry I couldn't think of before, right? In chapter 11, Lazarus is raised from the dead. Jesus comes back in the resurrection, right? And we see the second law, the second renewal, the second expectation by which to live our lives. And so these are key to understanding the Gospel of St. John, that it runs this new Torah for us, this new example, this new life for who we are. And so I invite you to look through John, make sure you touch base on some of these. Definitely, I want you to look at the resurrection story and the Gospel of St. John, chapter 21, where he feeds them, right? And he asks them, about this new life, and he comes back to Galilee. So I appreciate you doing this work. Make sure you see the other video. Make sure you take the quiz. All right. Have a great day. Take care, guys.